Sometimes the idea worth spreading is the idea that the old idea still works. This is a very low-tech, old-school speech about a very low-tech, old-school thing. The mentoring of creativity, the mentoring of artists by listening carefully and responding with openness and sensitivity. One of the things I do is teach playwriting, mainly to undergraduates at the National University of Singapore. And I've had 60 students come through my classes in the last 5 years, Introduction to Playwriting, followed by the somewhat grandiosely and optimistically titled Advanced Playwriting. And what I'm very proud of is that many of these young writers have managed to make a contribution to the national culture. From these 60 students, we've had 24 plays, both short and long, that they've written as students in my classes, be produced by different theatre companies in Singapore, and they met with great success. Just in the last month, one of the students was nominated for Best Script in the Straits Times Live Theatre Awards, which are the National Theatre Awards, for a script that she wrote in my class, while another has just garnered 4 rave reviews in the national media for his first play. Singapore is a young country with a rapidly evolving literary canon, and it's a point in history where it's possible to have an outsized influence. So my students are making the most of that opportunity, and it's a privilege for me to be part of that process. So I'd like to share with you today what I've learned over the last few years about the fundamental principles of making art, the methodology of mentoring creativity, and the nature of the creative process. Each year, on the first day of class, I give my students a few basic principles to remember as they start writing plays. The most important of which are love what you do, love life, and love who you are. Love what you do. This is really important for people wanting to go into the arts, because if you don't love the arts, why are you doing it? What is wrong with you? You could easily find a less challenging profession like oncology, or bringing peace to the Middle East through environmental activism. Now, of course, the flip side of loving, say, theatre is that it can be important to hate the theatre that already exists, to be utterly dissatisfied and irritated with what is out there, to want to tear down and rebuild artistic life in your own image. That's a powerful motivator. And that's how I got started, wanting to create the sort of theatre that I would want to see. So if it's not out there, make it yourself. Love what you do. Love life. Go and experience it, dive into it, engage with your fellow human beings. Break through the fog of shyness and prejudice and make a connection. Because embracing life is what gives artists material. You travel to where the food is strange and the customs are inexplicable, or stay in your own town, but fall in love with hopelessly inappropriate people. It's kind of like a membership rewards program. You know? Collect 3 misguided and traumatic relationships and get a free play out of it. Terms and conditions apply. So love life. Finally, love who you are. Love who you are and start your artistic journey from there. If you're religiously conservative, just be religiously conservative. If you're gay or lesbian, be gay or lesbian. If you're a political radical, be a political radical. Whatever you are, just be that thing. And when I say this in class in Singapore, there's always a ripple that runs through the room, as though nobody in their life has ever told them you don't have to pretend to be someone else. Because I know there's an immense amount of pressure on young people everywhere to succeed, to play the game, to sand your rough edges smooth. So love who you are applies everywhere, whether you're in supposedly conformist Asia or the seemingly free West. Because we're all pretending madly all of the time. We all put up masks like flimsy paper shields over the raw wounds of our insecurities. And the duty of the creative person, and we are all creative people, is to strip away those masks and present yourself vulnerable and a bit fragile, but unashamed and honest. See, it sounds like a paradox, but If you want to have an insight into the human condition, when you make art, which is artifice, you have to start from a place of truth. And even if you don't think you're pretending to be someone else, we all grow up wanting to be our heroes, at the very least, but your heroes are not you. And it can be a life-changing moment, or at least the start of a life-changing process, when you realize that you can only achieve something of lasting artistic value by just being yourself and making work from that place. So love who you are. The most critical thing is to find your authentic voice as an artist. And for the teacher of writing, the most important challenge is to help students find that authentic voice. This semester, one of my Singaporean students started a play that was set in New York, a place that she is yet to go to, in 1981, the year before she was born, where the characters have an inexplicable yearning for Alaska. And I said, well, I'm by no means an expert, but I tend to suspect that for native New Yorkers, Alaska is not a good place. It represents the end of civilization, a wasteland where bad things happen to people who eat bagels. But what were the writer's real issues? What was the play really about? When you listen carefully, it seemed that the writer was concerned with the claustrophobia that some people in Singapore feel, hemmed in by the pressures of urban living with no hinterland or wilderness to run to, which is a very real and important issue. So once you can figure out how to authentically express your concerns as an artist, you're going to have a lot more to say. Now, I want to make it clear that finding your authentic voice does not mean just to write about what you know, because I think that's a very fascist way of thinking about writing, because it diminishes the role of the imagination. But as a career strategy, it's best to write the play that only you can write. Paint the picture that only you can paint. Structure the exchange-traded credit derivative thing that only you can structure. Because then you have no competition. Delve into your physical or intellectual or moral landscape and find the story that you are the only person qualified to tell. Find your authentic voice. A final note on the fundamental principles of theater. Don't worry so much about learning the rules of dramatic storytelling, because by the time you get to be 18 or 19, you've absorbed thousands of narratives from film and TV, and you've subconsciously picked up all their rules. What I think is, the important thing is to unlearn the rules. And you can do this by looking outside the conventions of Western drama, to study other cultures. Now, I've had students who have honed their narrative instincts by consuming not Hollywood films or the classics of Anglo-American literature, but Japanese films, anime, manga. Now, in Japanese narratives, the registers of tone, the markers of characterization, the notions of dramatic arc are all very different from the Western way of doing things. And so the work of my students who draw inspiration from the cultures of Japan, India, China, it's fresh, it's unpredictable. When you study how other people tell stories and their narrative techniques, it opens your eyes. For example, in the Anglo-American school of playwriting, a pause is represented by a stage direction, typically in italics on the printed page. Pause, or silence, or a beat. So the silence is just there, between the characters, not belonging to anybody. But contemporary Japanese playwrights typically write silence as a part of the dialogue. On the page, it looks like character name, colon, ellipsis, 3 dots. So it's the spoken absence of words emanating from a single character. And characters can alternate their silences. So the masters of Japanese contemporary theater can have a whole page of dialogue where characters take turns saying nothing. So Hideki will say, and Naoko will say, then Hideki will say, and then Naoko will say. But clearly the playwright intends for the director and the actors to inflect the silence with something. The silence is owned, it's active. And when you learn this, it changes how you view dialogue. It changes how you view writing a scene. It changes how you perceive silence in everyday speech. So my feeling is that playwrights, all creative people, need to study how other cultures and communities are doing the same thing that they're doing. because it will make you question and reinvigorate the way that you do those things. So you keep your authentic voice, but learn different techniques. Now, for a teacher, it poses special challenges because you have to recognize that something is inspired by a whole different set of narrative rules, or that it's a hybrid form, a remix, a mashup. The, say, Indian sense of epic time and embrace of humanity, combined with the Japanese sense of minutely observed interior worlds, combined with the Chinese way of never having a happy ending, somebody must die and you cry and cry. This is what the 21st century is about. And you have to accept it and critique it on those terms. So how do you mentor creativity? Simple answer, you just listen and you comment. So I teach playwriting by crit or critique. It's not a remotely original methodology. Each week the playwrights bring in their pages, which the class reads out, and then the class and I critique it. Write, read, listen, comment. Write, read, listen, comment. And there's a wonderful alchemy to this labor-intensive way of doing things, because writers quickly develop a sense of what is strong about their own writing. And they also develop a sensibility and the skill of commenting on other people's work. When I teach playwriting, I teach as a practicing playwright. I'm not a professor, I don't have a PhD or even a creative writing MFA. I think it's important when you mentor artists to have paid your dues yourself, putting in years in the creative trenches, dealing with directors and producers, critics and audiences, learning about the whole world that surrounds and frames the solitary process of writing a play. You have to be able to say, hey, this is what worked for me. This is a mistake I made. Don't make that same mistake. But I have to admit I struggle with the idea of authority. Myself, I don't respond well to authority figures. I spent my whole life second-guessing and arguing with teachers. And despite the fact that I'm an opinionated person, I also recognize how obnoxious it is to impose one's opinions on defenseless students. So it's disconcerting to find myself at this point in my life the supposed font of wisdom, teaching in university, writing articles, speaking at a TEDx event. I struggle with it. And one of my minimal ways of coping is to deconstruct the idea of authority, to mask it, to blunt its edges. So instead of saying, you should do this or you should do that, I try and use, I suggest, or you might want to consider. I acknowledge that things are subjective. I say, my instinct is. The act of creation for the student writer then becomes washed of the smell of someone telling you what to do. Because it's very difficult to be creative when you have someone cracking the whip in the background and telling you how to do it. Maybe it's an Asian thing. Tomorrow at 5 p.m., we will be spontaneous. The creative mentor has to make the process center around the young artist. So I tell my students, I want to help you make your play as good as it can be. So tell me your concerns. What do you love? What do you hate? What do you want to say as an artist? Because that's where it begins and where it ends. And no matter what pages they give you, before you rush to say, I don't think this is working, you've got to ask yourself 3 times, are you sure the problem is with them and not with you? Are you sure it's not you who doesn't get it? Because you don't want to be the idiot who gave a C- to Samuel Beckett. Sam, your ending could be stronger. I suggest they stop waiting. You might want to consider having Godot arrive. When I comment on writers' work, I've discovered that sometimes it isn't necessary to say anything except, okay, that's good, keep going. And when I first started teaching, I thought, I can't have nothing to say. Surely I have to deploy some penetrating critique that will change everything. But I came to realize that sometimes it's a sensitive place in the process. You don't want to derail that. Momentum is hard to achieve in any creative endeavor. And once you've got that momentum, you shouldn't stop. You know, the train is leaving the station. Don't put a boulder on the tracks. So as a teacher, you learn to say, okay, keep going. Let's just see where it goes. Because one of the biggest lessons I've learned as a teacher is to put aside my intellectual vanity. You don't need to appear smart all the time, to have all the answers. It's okay to look dumb, vague, unsure. It's fine to say, I'm not sure what's going on here. There's something bothering me about scene 3, but I can't put my finger on it. Let me try and figure it out, but carry on for now. And now, the creative process. What is it that playwrights do that leads to those pages every week? Now, I have a theory that most creative people follow the same 3 steps. The first step is preparation, which can take many forms. Now, sometimes it's about sitting down and planning your play, making notes, plotting the whole dramatic arc. Sometimes it's inherent. Your preparation consists of the life that you've led up to this point, those 3 dysfunctional relationships that you went through that are going to come in very handy now. The second step is procrastination. Now, I call it staring out the window time to make it seem less shameful, but whatever you call it, it is necessary. And all my playwriting students do it. And I know this through highly scientific means. Every Tuesday night before Wednesday class, I read their Facebook status updates. OMG, just watched a whole season of Glee, gotta get to work. So the third step is the pressure of a deadline. And that is what makes the work come out. So remember, preparation plus procrastination plus pressure equals artistic production. Making art is a mixture of marathons and sprints and marathons, the steady plod of quiet craftsmanship and the burst of wild genius. And my advice to all artists is to accept that process, because when I was younger, it would really upset me that I couldn't seem to do anything until the very last minute. But once you accept it and embrace it, it removes the guilt and the feelings of worthlessness, which are very real. I mean, you still have to work through the night, but it makes the psychic burden easier to bear. And you can go back to finding the joy in your work. And part of finding joy is being able to share it. I believe in community, because making art can be lonely. And I have known that loneliness, and it is not fun. So I think creative people need to find communities to band together to face a world that can be cruel in its indifference. In my playwriting classes, at the end of the semester, there's this marathon reading at our apartment where the writers come at 10 in the morning and we read each writer's play in its entirety, which takes about 16 hours. So they're there through lunch and tea and dinner until 2 or 3 in the morning. And all my former students from my previous years are invited too. So as the day goes on, people drift in. So by the time you reach midnight, there's, well, a dozen students from the class and another maybe 15 alumni, reading, laughing, eating, drinking, critiquing, sharing the pleasures and pains of making art. It's perhaps this sense of community that I value the most. I mean, I run a branding consultancy, I help run a theater company. My teaching only occupies 3 hours a week for 26 weeks in a calendar year. So why do I care about it so much? For me, it could be because I spent my youth being impatient and full of myself, and teaching has taught me patience and humility. Could be because my wife and I don't have children of our own, so I channel my parental instincts and love into my students. And as every teacher knows, it's satisfying to see your students grow as people, become your friends, and do work that becomes part of the national conversation. It could be because if you care about art, you just want to see good art done, no matter who does it. It's all of those things. Making art is all about what you have to say. Teaching is about helping someone else say what they want to say. And in my life, I have the privilege of doing both, and it's something that I wish for all of you. Thank you.